There are questions that arrive quietly. Not with thunder or drama, not the kind of questions that announce themselves, that give you time to prepare an answer, to rehearse the words, to arrange your face into something composed and certain. The questions that change your life rarely come that way. They come softly in the dark, in the voice of someone who loves you, when your defenses are down and the night is too still for pretending. My little brother asked me one question on a Thursday night in October, when we were sitting on the back steps of our childhood home watching the last of the summer fireflies disappear into the tall grass beyond the fence. He was 19 years old. I was 24. He asked it the way he asked everything, directly, without cruelty, with the particular fearless honesty of a person who has always believed that love and truth are the same thing. He asked, and I opened my mouth and nothing came out. Not because I didn't know the answer. Because I knew it too well, had known it for years, carried it like a stone in my chest, and hearing it asked out loud by him in that voice on that night was the first time in my life that the answer felt more impossible to keep inside than to let go of. My name is Sam Whitfield. This is the story of the question my brother asked and what it cost me to answer it and what I found on the other side of that cost. It is the truest thing I have ever written. You need to understand what kind of person Dany was before you can understand what the question meant. Daniel Whitfield, Dany to everyone who had ever met him, because he had the kind of face and energy that made formal names feel like the wrong size, was 3 years and 4 months younger than me, and from the time he could walk and talk he had operated on a frequency slightly outside the normal human range. Not in a troubling way. In the way of people who are simply, genuinely, more alive to the world than most, more curious, more direct, more willing to say the thing everyone else was thinking quietly. He was the kid in elementary school who walked up to the new student on the first day and said, "Without preamble, you look nervous. Do you want to sit with me?" He was the teenager who, at our Uncle Ray's dinner table, asked why we never talked about the fact that Ray and his roommate, Gerald, had been living together for 23 years. He was the person in every room who made other people feel simultaneously seen and slightly terrified of being seen too clearly. Growing up with Dany was like growing up next to a very affectionate searchlight. I loved him more than anyone in the world. I also spent a significant portion of my childhood and adolescence doing my level best to stay out of his direct line of sight, because Dany's gaze had a way of landing on the parts of you that you were actively trying to keep in shadow. I had a lot of things in shadow. We had grown up in Millhaven, a mid-sized city in the kind of state where the winters are long and the neighborhoods are old and people stay close to home longer than they might elsewhere. Our parents were good people. Our father, a high school history teacher who coached baseball and had a laugh you could hear from 2 houses away. Our mother, a nurse who worked long shifts and came home smelling like antiseptic, and still always found the energy to ask about our days. They were loving and present and entirely ordinary in the way that good parents often are, and they had raised us with the general understanding that Whitfield men were straightforward, capable, and not particularly given to complicated feelings. Or at least that was the story I had absorbed, whether they had actually communicated it or whether I had constructed it from the ambient air of 1,000 small moments. A raised eyebrow, a redirected conversation, the particular silence that fell when emotion got too close to the surface, I couldn't say with certainty. What I could say was that by the time I was 14 I had built, with considerable ingenuity and effort, a version of myself that fit the story. A Sam Whitfield who was reliable, capable, good at school, good at sports, good at being the older brother, good at being the son his parents expected. A Sam Whitfield who did not examine too closely the parts of himself that didn't fit the frame. Dany, of course, was the one person who could always see the frame. He never said anything. For years, through high school, through my leaving for college, through the careful, managed life I constructed in the city, he never said a word about what I suspected he could see. He talked to me about everything else. His own life, his friendships, a girl he liked sophomore year, and then the slow, honest realization in junior year that it wasn't girls he was interested in, which he had told our parents with the characteristic Dany directness that had involved a Sunday dinner, a calm statement of fact, and approximately 3 seconds of silence before my mother had said okay. Pass the potatoes, and my father had said, "Does this mean you won't be setting us up with daughters-in-law?" In the tone he used for jokes, which was how you knew he was okay. I had sat at that table and watched my 19-year-old brother come out to our family over pot roast, and I had felt something I could not name, something that was joy for him and grief for myself all at once, a complicated chord of emotion I had pressed down and smiled over, and later, in the car driving back to my apartment in the city, had pulled over on the highway and sat in the dark for 10 minutes just breathing. Dany was out, Dany was free, Dany was himself completely and without apology at 19 years old. I was 22 and I was nowhere near the door. The relevant part of this story begins 2 years after Dany's Sunday dinner, in the summer before the October night in question. I had been living in the city for 3 years by then, working at an architectural firm as a junior draftsman, a job I was good at and moderately fulfilled by, sharing an apartment with a college friend named Patrick who was easy to live with and asked few questions. My life was organized and functional and gave me, on most days, enough forward momentum to avoid looking too directly at the thing I was not looking at. I met Kieran Walsh in June at a work event, the firm's summer gathering at a rooftop bar, one of those professional social occasions that everyone attends with mild reluctance and occasional genuine enjoyment. He had come as the plus one of a colleague, a landscape architect named Priya who had introduced him as my friend Kieran. He designs furniture, he's going to make me uncomfortable by being more talented than everyone here. He was tall, with the kind of quiet self-possession that reads as confidence without arrogance, the bearing of a person who is comfortable in their own body, and not particularly concerned with whether anyone else is comfortable with them. He had brown eyes and paint-stained hands, and the habit of listening with his full attention in a way that made whoever he was talking to feel like the most interesting person in the room. He and I ended up on the edge of the rooftop for an hour, talking about design, the philosophy of it, the way every object or structure encodes a set of values about how people should move and live and interact. He talked about furniture with the same love I felt for buildings, the belief that the things you fill a life with should be honest and considered and built to last. I talked about the gap between what gets designed and what gets built, about the places where compromise kills beauty and the places where constraint produces something unexpected. It was, objectively, a conversation about professional topics. It was also, simultaneously, the most seen I had felt in years. I went home afterward and told myself it was a good networking contact. I told myself this for approximately 2 weeks with diminishing conviction before I admitted to myself, alone in my apartment at 11:30 on a Tuesday night, that what I had felt on that rooftop was something I needed to stop pretending I didn't know the name for. Kieran and I became friends. This was the version of things I was able to allow, the shape that fit inside the frame I'd built. We got coffee, then lunch, then the occasional evening at a bar near his studio in the design district where he worked. We talked about work and books and the city and families and the particular experience of being in your mid-20s, and understanding that the map you'd been given for your life didn't quite match the territory. He was funny in the dry, understated way I liked best, humor as precision instrument rather than performance. He was thoughtful about things that mattered and deliberately unbothered by things that didn't. He had a way of saying difficult things simply, without drama, that I envied with a depth that was itself a kind of answer. He was also, I came to understand over those months, someone who was waiting, not impatiently, not in any way I could have pointed to directly, but in the specific, attentive way of a person who sees more than they're saying, who has decided to let something develop at its own pace, who is prepared to be patient because they believe the thing they're waiting for is worth the patience. I did not examine what he was waiting for. I was still very good at not examining things. What I did instead was go home to Millhaven for my mother's birthday in late September, where I sat at the family dinner table and watched my brother Dany move through the world like a person who had been given permission to be entirely himself. And I felt the ache of it, the specific accumulated ache of someone who has been holding their breath for a very long time and is starting to feel the oxygen debt. The birthday dinner itself was warm and ordinary. My mother's pot roast, my father's terrible jokes, Dany's running commentary on everything that made my mother laugh until she covered her mouth with her napkin. I had driven up that morning and was staying the night, sleeping in my old room with its faded posters and the window that still rattled in the wind the way it had since I was 12. After dinner, my parents went to bed early. My mother had a morning shift, and Dany and I ended up on the back steps the way we always had since childhood, when we needed to talk about something or didn't need to talk about anything in particular. The backyard in October, the old oak tree, the fence my father had repaired 3 summers running, the tall grass at the back where we caught fireflies every summer until we were too old to admit we still wanted to. The last of the season's fireflies were out, sparse now, the dying end of summer's illumination, occasional and precious. We sat in comfortable silence for a while. Dany had a mug of tea. I had my hands around nothing, just the cool air. "How's the city?" he asked. "Good," I said. "Work is busy, good busy. You seeing anyone?" The question landed with its usual practiced casualness, Dany's version of a door left open. He had asked some variation of it regularly for years. I had given some variation of not really, no one serious for the same number of years, and he had accepted the answer without pressing, and we had moved on. "Not really," I said, automatic, rehearsed. Dany was quiet for a moment. The fireflies blinked in the tall grass. Sam, he said. Something in his voice was different, not the casual older sibling question, something more deliberate, something that had been decided. I looked at him. He was looking at the yard, not at me, his hands around the mug, and his profile in the faint light from the kitchen window was so familiar. The same nose we'd both gotten from our father, the same slight furrow between the brows when he was thinking carefully, that looking at him felt like looking at a version of myself who had managed to get somewhere I hadn't. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "And I need you to know that I'm asking because I love you, not to push you, not to make anything harder, because I love you." My heart in my chest was doing something complicated. "Okay," I said. He turned to look at me then. His eyes were direct, they were always direct, Dany's eyes, and in them was something I recognized. Not the searchlight, not the fearless curiosity, but something quieter and more tender. The look of a person who has been carrying a worry about someone they love for a long time and has decided carefully that it's time to say it. "Are you happy?" he asked. "Not fine, not okay, are you actually happy?" I opened my mouth. Nothing came out. Not the automatic answer. Not "yeah, of course, things are good." Not any of the layered, practiced deflections I had spent years developing into a kind of art form. Nothing. Because the question was too true and too direct and too full of love, and I was sitting next to my little brother in the backyard of our childhood home on an October night with the last fireflies going out one by one, and something in me that had been held together very tightly for a very long time simply gave. "Dany," I said, and my voice came out wrong, rough at the edges, the voice of a person who is about to cry, which was information I processed with some distant part of myself that was still observing the situation. "Hey," he said softly. He put his mug down and turned fully toward me. "Hey, it's okay." I stopped. My hands were pressed together between my knees and I was looking at them rather than at him. "I don't know how to." "You don't have to say anything right now," he said. "You don't have to say it like an announcement or like a big thing, you can just say whatever's true, just whatever's true right now in this yard." The grass was still, the last firefly blinked once and was gone. I said no. "No what?" he said gently. "No," I said. "I'm not happy, I haven't been, I mean I'm okay, I'm functional, but happy," my voice broke briefly on the word. "I don't think I know what that would feel like, because I've been carrying something for so long and I keep thinking I'll figure out how to put it down and I keep not figuring it out." Dany was very still, not holding his breath, just present, fully, quietly present. "Sam," he said, "are you gay?" And there it was, the question, simple and direct and full of love the way Dany did everything. I looked at him. And then I did something I had not done in front of another person since I was very young. I started to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically. Quietly, the way people cry when they've been holding something for too long and the container has finally given way, just the overflow of years of careful containment, released at last into the cool October air. "Yeah," I said, "I think I have been for a long time." Dany put his arm around me and I leaned into him the way I had as a kid when something was wrong. The direction reversed, the older brother leaning on the younger one, and he held me with the ease of a person who has never been frightened of emotion, who has always understood it as information rather than weakness, and he said very quietly, "I know, I've known for a while, I was waiting for you." We stayed on the back steps for a long time. I talked. I hadn't expected to, had anticipated maybe the single admission and then the retreating back into the managed version of myself, but something about the release of it, the saying out loud of the thing that had lived in silence for so long, created a momentum I didn't want to stop. I told Dany about the years of knowing and not knowing, the careful architecture of avoidance, the girlfriends who hadn't worked out and the reason I'd never let myself examine too closely, the accumulation of evidence I'd spent a decade not reading. And I told him about Kieran. Not everything, not the full, precise shape of what I felt, which I was still learning myself, but enough. The rooftop bar, the coffee and the lunches, the conversations that went long, the way I drove home afterward and felt more like myself than I had felt anywhere else, and the way that feeling scared me because I didn't know what to do with it. Dany listened to all of it. He asked questions that were smart and careful, not interrogating, just the questions of someone who wants to understand, who is interested in the full picture. He laughed at the right moments, gently. He didn't rush to fill the silences. When I finished, he said, "What are you going to do?" I looked at the dark yard. I don't know yet. That's okay, he said. You don't have to know yet. A pause, but you know you have to stop carrying it the way you've been carrying it. I know, I said. And you know you can't keep it from mom and dad forever, not because they need to know everything, but because, he stopped, choosing his words, because you deserve to be fully known by the people who love you. You deserve that, Sam. I looked at him, my little brother, 19 years old, who had walked through the door I was standing in front of with an ease I envied and a grace I was learning from. How were you so okay with it, I asked. When you told them, how did you just do it? He thought about it honestly. I wasn't that okay with it, he said. I was terrified. I shook through the whole dinner. I knocked over my water glass. Do you remember? I did remember. I had thought it was just Dany being Dany. I was shaking, he said. But I decided that whatever happened, being known was better than being hidden. Even if it went badly, and it didn't, we got lucky with them, but even if it had, I thought, I can survive being known and rejected more than I can survive never being known at all. He paused. Does that make sense? Yeah, I said quietly, it does. I think you're at that point, he said. I think that's why you couldn't answer just now, because you're not at the beginning of figuring this out. You're at the place where staying hidden is costing you more than coming out would. I sat with that for a moment. When did you get this wise? I said finally. He grinned, the Dany grin, full and unguarded. I've always been wise, you just never asked me anything before. I laughed, which was also almost crying, which was both at once. He bumped his shoulder against mine and we sat there for another hour talking and not talking, and the fireflies were all gone now but the stars were clear and the old oak tree moved gently in the October wind, and I felt not resolved, not finished. The work was very far from finished but lighter. Measurably, perceptibly lighter, as though something had been moved from inside my chest to outside of it, and I was only now noticing how much room it had taken up. I drove back to the city the next morning with a head full of clarity and a stomach full of fear, which is the combination that tends to produce action if you let it. I called Kieran from the car. Not to say anything in particular, I told myself I was calling to confirm plans we'd loosely mentioned for the following weekend, but the moment he picked up and said, "Hey, how was the family thing?" I heard myself say, "It was good. Something happened. I want to talk to you about something when I'm back." Of course, he said without hesitation. Come over Saturday, I'll make food. Kieran's apartment was above his studio in the design district, accessible by a narrow staircase that smelled permanently of wood shavings and linseed oil, opening into a large, high-ceilinged space that was half living area, half ongoing project. There were always 2 or 3 pieces of furniture in various stages of completion, and the space had the feeling of a place where someone actually lived and worked, rather than decorated and maintained. I had always loved it. It had always felt, in some way I hadn't examined, like the room I was most myself in. He had made pasta, simple, good, with bread from the bakery on the corner and a bottle of red he'd been given by a client and hadn't opened yet. We ate at his work table, which he'd cleared for the occasion, and set with the unpretentious care of a person who believes everything worth doing is worth doing properly. We talked over dinner the way we always did, the week work, a project he was almost finished with, a building I'd drafted that had gone to the client and come back with too many notes. Normal conversation, comfortable. And underneath it the whole time the awareness of what I had come here to say sitting in my chest like a held note. After dinner we were on the couch with the last of the wine and the comfortable quiet of a long evening winding down, and Kieran said, without looking at me, looking at some middle distance in the room, "You said something happened." "Yeah," I said. "You don't have to tell me," he said, "but I'm here if you want to." I looked at the side of his face. The unhurried patience of him, the way he gave me the room to say things at my own pace, qualities I had come to rely on without ever nomming them as the gifts they were. "My brother asked me something," I said, "on Thursday night." "Dany." "Yeah." "What did he ask?" I set my glass down, breathed. "He asked if I was happy," I said, and I couldn't answer, and then he asked if I was gay, and I said yes. A pause. "First time I've said it, second time technically I told Dany Thursday and now I'm telling you." I stopped. "I don't know exactly why I'm telling you. I mean, I think I know why you specifically out of everyone." "Sam," he said. I stopped. He turned to look at me, and his expression, I had seen many expressions on Kieran's face over 6 months of friendship, the whole register of him, from the dry amusement to the concentrated focus he wore over difficult work to the rare, full warmth that came out when something genuinely delighted him. I had cataloged all of them without admitting to myself that I was cataloging. This one was new. It was careful and honest, and underneath the carefulness something that had been waiting. "I've been wondering," he said quietly, "for a few months now whether you'd get here." I looked at him. Here. Here, he confirmed, having this conversation with me. "You knew," I said. "I didn't know anything for certain," he said with the precision he always brought to things. "But I felt something in this," he gestured between us, a small, deliberate gesture, "in this, and I didn't want to say it or push it because it wasn't mine to push, it was yours." He held my gaze. "But I'm glad you're here." I stopped. "I'm new at this," I said, "at being honest about it. I've been managing it and containing it for so long that I don't fully know how to just say things, directly, the way you do." "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said. "I'm not asking you to," a pause. "I'd just like to know if the thing I've been feeling has been going in both directions." "Yes," I said. "It came out steadier than I expected. The practice of the last 2 days, Dany in the backyard, the morning drive, the decision to stop being someone who contained instead of said, producing a new fluency. Yes, it has been for a while." Kieran was quiet for a moment. The studio around us was still, the smell of wood and work, the low lamplight. "Okay," he said. And then he smiled, slowly, fully, the rare warmth, the one I'd cataloged but never let myself name as the thing it was. "Okay," I said. "Coming out is not one moment. I want to be clear about this because I think the way it gets told, the single dramatic confession, the door thrown open, the music rising, misrepresents something important about the actual lived experience of it. Coming out is a process. It is the same true thing said over and over to different people in different rooms at different costs. And each time you say it, it changes slightly, becomes a little more yours, a little less terrifying, a little more like something you are rather than something you are admitting to." I said it to Dany on a Thursday in October. I said it to Kieran on a Saturday. I said it to my college friend Patrick, who shared my apartment, on a Sunday morning over coffee when he asked how my weekend had been and I found I didn't want to give the automatic answer anymore. He set his mug down, looked at me for a moment and said, "Man, okay, I did not see that coming, but honestly good for you. Do you want more coffee?" Which was Patrick's version of full acceptance and was, in its way, perfect. I said it to my friend group from work, not all at once, not as an announcement, but in the natural unfolding of conversations, the slow permeation of the truth into the ordinary fabric of daily life. And in November, on a Sunday, I said it at my parents' kitchen table. The night before, I had called Dany and he had said, "Do you want me there?" And I had said yes, and so we were both at the table, Dany beside me, quiet and present, the way he had been on the back steps, and my parents across from us with their Sunday morning coffee. I had practiced the words. I had rehearsed several versions. What came out when the moment arrived was not any of the rehearsed versions but the simple truth without structure or ceremony. "Mom, Dad, I'm gay. I've known for a while and I'm sorry it took me this long to tell you, but I wanted to be ready to say it properly." The silence was different from the one I'd been dreading, not the silence of rejection or discomfort or the careful management of unwanted information. The silence of two people taking something in, making room for it, adjusting. My mother spoke first. She is a nurse, my mother, a person who has spent 30 years being present with people in their most vulnerable moments, who has learned through long practice the difference between a response that helps and a response that hurts. She looked at me with the expression she wore when she was about to say something she had thought about. "How long have you been carrying this?" she asked. "Since I was about 15, I said, "maybe earlier." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were bright. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm sorry you felt like you had to carry it alone. That breaks my heart, Sam, that you've been alone with it." "It's not your fault," I said. "Maybe not," she said, "but I'm your mother. I should have been a place you could bring this." My father was quiet for longer. He is a man who says important things slowly, who treats significant moments with the respect of deliberateness. He looked at the table surface, then at Dany. Then at me. "You're both still my boys," he said, simply, directly, the economy of a man who means every word. "That hasn't changed and won't change, you understand." "Yeah," I said. Good, he said. Then I think what I need is a little time to adjust my thinking about some things, not about you, about ideas I had, things I assumed. I'm going to need to do some of that adjusting. He met my eyes. But while I'm doing it, nothing between us changes, okay? It was honest. It was not the uncomplicated embrace of a story that resolves cleanly. My father was telling me the truth, that he loved me without question and that he also had work to do, adjustments to make, the quiet renovation of assumptions he'd held without examining them. That truth was worth more to me than a performed acceptance would have been. Okay, I said. Dany reached over under the table and squeezed my arm once briefly. A small, private signal, you did it. We had more coffee. My mother made eggs. The Sunday morning moved around us in the ordinary, continuous way of Sunday mornings, and I sat at the kitchen table of my childhood home as the whole version of myself for the first time and felt the strange, enormous lightness of it. Let me tell you about what slow burn actually feels like from the inside, because it is nothing like the version of it that gets described in stories, not the dramatic restraint, not the noble suffering. It is simpler and stranger than that. It is two people who know something true about each other and about the space between them, and who are choosing for the time being to move carefully, not because they don't trust each other, but because one of them is doing the work of becoming himself, and the other understands that this is sacred work that cannot be rushed. Kieran and I existed through November and into December in the space between friendship and something more, a space that had warmth in it and honesty and the particular tenderness of two people who have named the thing between them without yet deciding what to do with it. We saw each other often. We talked about everything. There was a quality to our time together that was, I found, increasingly unlike anything I had experienced in a friendship, a resonance, an ease, the feeling of being in the right frequency. He did not push. I was grateful for that with a depth I couldn't always articulate. He had his own history, he had been out since college, had lived the ordinary complexity of relationships and their endings, had arrived at 28 with a settled, clear sense of himself that was not arrogance but simply the confidence of a person who has done the work of knowing himself. He understood from that place that I was doing that work now. He let me do it. What I was doing, concretely, I had started seeing a therapist, a man named Dr. Ree who had a calm, direct practice and an office full of good light and who in our first session had said after I'd explained why I was there, "It sounds like you've spent a lot of years being a very convincing translation of yourself rather than the original. Let's work on getting you back to the original." I had liked him immediately. I was spending more time with Dany, coming home more often, talking on the phone more, leaning on the friendship that had always been there between us but that I had kept at a slight distance out of the unconscious fear that Dany would see too much. Now I let him see. It turned out that being seen by someone who loves you is not the catastrophe you'd feared. It is, in fact, one of the better experiences available to a human being. I was doing the small daily work of learning to be honest, not dramatically, not all at once, but the accumulation of small true moments. The morning I told my colleague Maya the real reason a date she'd tried to set me up on hadn't worked out. The evening I told Patrick what I actually thought about something instead of the diplomatic version. The habit of noticing when I gave the automatic answer that I was doing it, and then sometimes replacing it with something true. I was also, quietly and without drama, falling in love. I did not say this yet. I knew it, in the way you know things that you aren't quite ready to give language to, but I held it without speaking it, the way you hold something precious and slightly fragile while you figure out how to carry it safely. 3 weeks before Christmas, I was at Kieran's studio on a Friday evening, ostensibly to see the piece he was finishing, a dining table commissioned by a family in the suburbs, 6 months of work coming to completion. It was extraordinary, a long surface of pale white oak, the grain running the full length, the joinery visible and deliberate, the legs clean and structural and slightly tapered in a way that gave the whole thing a feeling of lightness that belied its obvious solidity. I stood looking at it for a long moment. "It's the best thing you've made," I said. "I think so too," he said, with the unpretentious certainty of someone assessing their own work honestly. "What happens when it leaves?" He looked at the table. "They always leave," he said. "That's the point. You make something and then it goes and lives in the world and does what it was built to do." A pause. "If you did it right, you can let it go." I looked at him. He was still looking at the table and there was something in his face, not wistfulness, not loss, but a kind of settled peace with the impermanence of things that hit me somewhere precise and deep. "Kieran," I said. He turned. I had not planned what I was about to say. I had been doing less planning recently, Dr. Ree had pointed out gently and repeatedly that I had spent most of my life planning my way around feeling things, and that the alternative, while less controlled, tended to produce more accurate results. I know I'm new at this, I said. I know I'm still figuring out what it looks like to be myself, fully myself, without the walls up. And I know that's probably a complicated thing to be around, but I want you to know that over the last 6 months you've been, I stopped, tried again. You've been the place where I've been most able to practice being honest, with myself and with you, and I don't think that's an accident. I think it's because of who you are and how you are, and because of what I feel about you, which I've been careful about saying, but I don't want to be careful about it anymore. The studio was very quiet around us. The smell of the oak, the low evening light, the finished table between us. I love you, I said. I think I have been for a while, I'm just now letting myself say it. Kieran looked at me. Something in his face moved, not surprise, but the arrival of something that had been coming for a long time, a wave finally reaching shore. He crossed the distance between us and stood in front of me and put one hand on the side of my face in a gesture so careful and deliberate that I understood it as what it was, not a claim but a question, a held-out hand. You took your time, he said softly, not a complaint, an acknowledgement. I know, I said, I'm sorry it took. Don't apologize, he said, you took exactly the time you needed. His thumb moved slightly against my cheekbone, the smallest gesture. I love you too, he said, I have been also for a while. I closed my eyes for a moment, took it in. The truth of it, this truth, simple and enormous, received into the whole and present version of myself, not the managed version, not the translated version, the original. Okay, I said when I opened them. He smiled, the full one, the rare warmth, the one I'd always known was the real one. Yeah, he said, okay. I brought Kieran home for Christmas. Dany knew, of course. I had called him the day after the studio evening at 11 at night, and he had picked up on the second ring as though he'd been waiting. And when I told him, he had made a sound that was pure uncomplicated joy and said, I'm so happy I could scream, I'm actually going to scream, hold on. And then I had heard a muffled sound that was Dany screaming into a pillow, which was the most Dany possible response to anything, and which made me laugh so hard I cried. My parents knew about Kieran in the abstract. My mother had asked, with her usual gentle persistence, whether there was anyone in my life, and I had said yes, and that I'd like to bring him home at Christmas, and she had said that she would make more food than was reasonable, which was her love language and the correct response. He arrived with me on the afternoon of the 23rd, carrying wine and a small side table he'd made, a gift for my parents, plain and beautiful, without ceremony. My father had looked at the joinery for a long time before saying this is very good work in the voice he used for genuine admiration. Which was the highest available praise from a man who did not give praise unnecessarily. My mother had hugged him within the first 5 minutes, which was her love language applied to new people, and which Kieran had received with a grace that I had watched with a feeling I didn't have a name for yet, something that was pride and love and gratitude all braided together. Dany had shaken his hand and then said, loudly enough for the room, so you're the person who finally made my brother a functional human being. I have a lot of questions. Christmas at the Whitfield house. My father's terrible jokes at dinner, my mother's excessive food, Dany's running commentary, the old arguments about the correct way to do the dishes and who had broken the specific ornament in 2014, and whether the star or the angel went on top of the tree. And Kieran in the middle of it, not performing comfort, not managing the situation, just present, genuinely present, the quality of attention he brought to everything now brought to my family, taking them in with the same quiet interest he brought to everything worth understanding. On Christmas Eve, after my parents had gone to bed and Dany had fallen asleep on the couch watching a film, Kieran and I sat by the tree with the lights on and the house quiet around us. How are you doing? He asked. I thought about it genuinely, not the automatic answer, the real one. Happy, I said. First time I had said that word and meant it entirely. Not fine, not okay, not functional, happy, the actual thing. He looked at me with the expression I had come to know as his most honest one, the full attention, the warmth, the settled steadiness of a person who is exactly where he wants to be. Yeah, he said, me too. Outside, the December night was cold and clear. The kind of deep winter sky that makes everything feel very still and very possible simultaneously. Through the window, the first snow of the season was beginning to fall, quiet and steady, covering the ordinary backyard, the old oak tree, The tall grass where the last of the summer fireflies had blinked out on a Thursday night in October when my little brother asked me one question and changed everything. Dany texted me in February, a Sunday morning, months after Christmas, after life had resumed its forward motion and I was back in the city and the ordinary days had accumulated into something that felt, genuinely and consistently, like mine. The text said, "Hey, just checking in, are you happy?" The same question, the one he'd asked on the steps, the one I hadn't been able to answer. I looked at it for a moment, thought about my apartment, the new houseplant Kieran had given me because he said my apartment needed something alive in it. The manuscript I was reading for pleasure, just for pleasure because I had started doing things for pleasure. The therapy appointment on Tuesday. The dinner I was cooking that evening because Kieran was coming over and I had decided recently to learn to cook properly because I was the kind of person who did things properly now. I thought about the back steps and the last fireflies and the voice that had asked, with love and without cruelty, the question I had no answer for. I typed back, "Yeah, actually yes, I am." 3 seconds passed, then. "I know, I can hear it in you. I've been waiting for that answer for years. And then, also you owe me a very nice birthday present for being the one who started all this." I laughed alone in my apartment on a Sunday morning, laughing at my phone, the uncomplicated laughter of a person who is, for the first time in their adult life, not managing anything. Just here, just present, just alive. I called him, he picked up on the first ring. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he said, and I could hear the grin in it, the Dany grin, full and warm and as familiar to me as the sound of my own name. We talked for an hour, about nothing much and everything important the way we always had and always would. I want to say one more thing for anyone who is standing where I was standing, at the edge of the backyard in the October dark, holding the answer to a question nobody has asked yet, waiting for the right moment, waiting to be ready, waiting for the fear to be smaller before you move. The fear does not get smaller before you move. The fear gets smaller because you move. Because you say the true thing to the first person and then the next and then the one after that, and each time you say it, you are giving yourself a little more room, enlarging the space in which you are allowed to exist, expanding the territory of your own life. My little brother asked me if I was happy. I couldn't answer. And in that silence, that terrifying, honest, involuntary silence, was the beginning of everything. Not because the silence was the answer, but because the person who loved me enough to sit with me in it, to wait in it without impatience or judgment, to offer me the room to say whatever was true, that person was the reason I finally could. You need one person like that, just one, someone who loves you before you love yourself, someone who sees you clearly and waits for you to see yourself the same way. If you have that person, tell them, let them ask the question. Let yourself not have the answer right away for that first long and terrifying moment. And then when you're ready, answer.